Hey there, it's Andrea, and welcome to the Voice of Influence podcast. Today I have with me Kamales Lardi. She is a bold strategic thinker in digital and business transformation. She combines over 23 years of deep cross industry experience with the latest digital and technology solutions. Kamalish is listed in the top 10 global thought leaders in digital transformation, and she is the author of the book, The Human Side of Digital Transformation. Welcome to the podcast, Kamales Lardi.
Thank you for having me, Andrea. It's wonderful to be here with you today.
So, why don't we start with just some basics? What
Mhm.
is digital transformation? How do you define it?
Digital transformation can be defined in many ways, and I think this is one of the key challenges in the business world today. Pretty much anything that's relating to technology implementation these days are grouped under the topic of digital transformation. So it might be easier for me to first define what I don't think digital transformation is. It isn't just about technology implementation. It isn't a silver bullet solution for companies. And it's not a project that has a start date and an end date where at the end you have some kind of tech solution that's implemented. I like to define digital transformation as a organization-wide change that is impacting the way a company operates as well as the way it delivers value to customers. And it's enabled by technology. And I think this is one of the kind of easiest and simplest way to define digital business transformation.
So, when it comes to creating actual transformation, I know that you talk about this a lot, not just executing those tasks, but actually becoming that digitally transformed organization. Why do you emphasize the human side?
This is something that I've observed over the last 23 years. I've been in this space for a very long time. And I have to preface that by saying, digital transformation as a topic has become quite a bit of a hype over the last couple of years, particularly after the COVID environment where we had quite a lot of companies going into the digital space to ensure business continuity and continued engagement with customers online when we didn't have physical contact anymore. So it became quite a bit of a hype, and we see most companies across the industry, across the globe, implementing some form of digital transformation initiative. Now, what is, I think, quite important to understand is over the past couple of decades, technology had, we've had digital business transformation existing in our work environment pretty much from the 70s and 80s. As soon as we started implementing technology and using technology in the business world, we've had digital transformation. Now, the interesting thing is, over the last 2 decades, I've observed companies from various industries, various regions. It doesn't matter what kind of company you are or what kind of culture you come from as an organization. The one thing that can make or break any strategic or technology implementation is the people element. And this is really getting people on board, getting people to understand what you're trying to implement, the purpose of this implementation, what's the final goal you want to achieve at the end. And I think this is the most important element that tends to get underestimated as well. And so this is why, from my own observations and my own working with customers, working with clients, working with organizations of all sizes, this was the common thread that I noticed. This is what drove me to think about how can I write something, kind of a playbook for senior business leaders to understand what these elements are, what is the success factor for transformation, and how do we implement this in a step-by-step approach. And so that triggered me to write the book, basically.
Okay, so many other questions, but I'm gonna
Mhm.
I'm gonna keep going with this one. In your book, you talk about spark for why companies decide to go through a digital transformation, a specific one, and that might be caused by a shock or a planned evolution. In December, we all know what happened with Southwest
Mm.
and the cascade of problems that resulted from a system being pushed past its limits by the weather and everything that happened there. And then just a couple weeks ago, there was the FAA computer system failure that grounded all flights in the US for a period of time. I guess I assume that these classify as shock situations. Is that how you would define them?
Absolutely. These were external factors or internal factors, basically elements that triggered a sudden change in the business operations. that resulted in a disastrous outcome. Now, what I find interesting though about these examples that you just cited, um, coming out of the COVID environment as well, where we had a certain shock to the system, once in a lifetime, once in a generation, shock to most of our kind of business experience or business environments. Um, you would imagine companies would have started looking at updating their systems, workaround processes, or kind of a plan B or backup plans. And it's still quite shocking to see many organizations have fallen back into kind of the pre-COVID environment and still susceptible to some of these challenges. And I think some of the outcomes of that and the reactions of the companies, how they dealt with those situations as well. The reaction time was just, it was shocking for me. I don't know how you experienced that, but for me, it was quite a shock to see that still happening.
Absolutely, it was shocking. I was surprised to know there were red flags that they'd heard that this was a problem, and then they waited so long. And so I guess that was my next question really is, why do you think that some companies, obviously there's immediate financial costs, but why do historically successful companies or governments
Mhm.
resist such transformation?
Um, in my experience, and I do detail this a little bit in the book as well, there's two common elements or two common things that prevent people in leadership from going into the transformation process. So it's either a fear of loss of control. Basically, this is how I've done it all the time. This is what I know within my space. This is what I can control. Um, so that keeping within that space, or a lack of understanding for what could be the potential of transformation, what could be the potential outcome. I think there's a lot of systematic issues as well within existing organizations. And this is part of what I try to touch in the book, looking at creating the next generation or the kind of future focused type organizations, companies that are fundamentally different in terms of why they exist, how they operate, and how they utilize technology to engage with their customers in a better way. Think building a new type of organization, because existing organizations, traditional organizational structures, the systems are just not built for these new dynamic disruptions that we're seeing in the business landscape. So, for example, a very simple element around how are leadership teams measured for success. A lot of times in organizations, leadership teams are measured on a quarterly basis, quarterly implementation, quarterly success measures. Another example would be the strategic planning within an organization. We're still within this annual strategic planning process in many companies,
Mm.
where you look at yearly planning, and every year within a certain cycle, you do a strategic plan for the rest of the year. And this plan could be anytime within, looking forward to 5 to 10 years or things like that. Companies are still doing these very traditional kind of approaches, taking these traditional approaches to business management. But the environment has changed dramatically. What we're seeing is breakthrough technologies coming out almost on a daily basis, right? If you
Mm.
think about ChatGPT and the kind of disruption that it's created, OpenAI has existed in the market for quite a long time. But what we're seeing is people and companies are still surprised at the outcomes that that these technologies are bringing, and the potential disruption that we're going to see in certain industries. And so I find it quite interesting that it's almost traditional companies are lagging behind in terms of what's happening around the market, in terms of technology, in terms of people, and people's behavior as well. If you look at the global customer base, the rate at which people adopt technology as well is massively increased. So organizations are still kind of two steps behind. And this is why we end up in these sort of situations.
Organizations, government.
Governments,
I'm
yes.
Oh my goodness. You know, it's all really fascinating, and I know that you have thoughts about what how a traditional organization needs to transform their business processes, but their culture in order to be able to maintain a culture that can continue to make changes, right? I mean, what can you tell us a little bit about what your thoughts are on that?
Definitely. So I like to think of organizations as a living system or a living organism, right? This is the analogy that I like to use. And it's very similar to the human body. It has systems, it has processes, it has functions, all of these elements coming together to create a certain culture, a certain accepted culture within that organization structure. And this culture, this structure, fights to keep its status quo based on past successes. We've done it before like this. It's successful in that way. We know this environment, so we're going to fight to keep it in that way. And this then seeps into the way people behave. It seeps into how we reward people for their behavior. It seeps into kind of the accepted culture and DNA of the business. And when we start to introduce new elements, so this could be a new technology, it could be a demand from the customer that triggers changes, it could be a shift in trends in the market, any kind of change, the system, the body, the organization fights against this to maintain its status quo because it's something new. And this could be something that's detrimental to the business, but it could also be something that could be a huge opportunity for growth and development, but it fights against it in the same way, right? And at the center of this, so this kind of structure is called the amygdala response within an organization. And this basically at the center of this are people, right? You
Mm.
have business leaders and business owners who are supposed to be leading this change and transformation, who are falling back on their kind of traditional experiences and traditional accepted environment. And then you have staff members who follow the lead of their managers and kind of the management team or leadership team. And they fight against it as well because they don't see examples of stepping out of this structure being rewarded in a good way.
Mm.
And then you have also customers who are demanding these changes and not getting them, and getting these products, services, and so on from new startups, from different kinds of companies that are being set up. So they have an alternative that they can go to. So they're not depending on these traditional companies to give them what they need. And of course, then you have also service providers and tech companies and so on that are meant to be driving this change and transformation. And they're not leading the market in that sense, right? And so what we're seeing is the culture within an organization does drive this, it's needed. And the change of culture is absolutely needed to drive change within the entire organization. Otherwise, it stands in the way of innovation and it stands in the way of the next phase of the organization in the digital future. And so I don't know if I addressed your question well, but I like to use this analogy because it really does, for me, illustrate the fact that the culture is kind of a living embodiment in an organization. And it does take quite a huge effort and a lot of focus to shift this culture towards, a more open mindset, towards acceptance of innovation. And I think these are things that many companies struggle with today.
Hmm. I I agree, and I was listening to something else that you were with some other show that you were on, and you were talking about values, the values of a organization. Um, the This is something that's really interesting to me. Is should the company set the values, or like the CEO, the origin, the founder, whatever, set these values? Or do the values end up coming out once you've hired the team and you realize what you have and you start to see, oh, these are our values. This is who we are. It seems to me like it might be a combination of both, but I'm wondering what your take is on that.
It is a combination of both, but I find this also a very interesting place to be in. I've been through this process several times, advising companies in this transformation process, as well as driving my own organization towards that change. I'm a true believer that it starts from the leadership. The leadership team has to make the assessment and understand the direction of the company. Where do you want this company to be in the next 3 to 5 years?
Mhm.
What is the market going to look like? Is your business still going to be relevant? Right? This comes from top down, having this good understanding for are we going to exist the way that we are today in 5 years, just considering the rapid changes that are going on in the market. In order to achieve success in that new environment, what kind of culture do we need to build in the organization? What kind of values do we have to have? What kind of behaviors do we need to encourage? And that's the kind of trigger point where you say, okay, we need this sort of culture, these set of values need to be defined. Are we embodying that today
Mm-hmm.
with our people? If not, what are the changes that need to happen? And these are tough questions to ask because it does take a certain amount of awareness of yourself as a leader as well. Am I demonstrating these values to the people? Am I being the role model in terms of what's accepted and what's not? These are fairly tough questions, which not very many people, sometimes you've got to hold the mirror up to yourself as well as a leader in an organization. And that's a tough thing to do. So it does involve a certain amount of people transformation, human transformation, and also organization transformation. And then the next element is really looking at, does the set of values that I'm trying to exemplify in an organization, does that align with the people in the organization? Because that's where you get real transformation and strength in a company, when you can meet the two, right? What I'm trying to set up for the company's success in alignment with what people believe. And if it doesn't align, it raises then tough questions as well. Do I have the right people in the company for this next stage? Right? Are these the right people? Are these the right skill sets? If you want to build a purpose driven organization, you need to have people who are in alignment with that purpose. So I've seen organizations that are kind of bottom up driven that's been successful, where the culture comes from the type of people that they have, the values that are embodied with them. I've seen organizations set the values from top down as part of the transformation process. So I think it does depend on where the organization is for that moment, and who's driving the change and how much of a change they want to see in the company as well.
Mm. And what do you think it takes for people? And so I'm so fascinated by transformation, I always have been. And people, that people transformation, a person deciding that they're going to change is the same kind of situation as the organization, whether most of the times it takes a shock, it takes something big to get us to move and to change. But when somebody else is setting forth that transformation and and then I have to kind of follow, um there's, like you had said, there's a difference between just getting people to do the thing that's different versus
Mhm.
actually changing with the company. What do you think that it takes for an individual to really make that change for themselves, like to be able to get on board?
So I think there are two elements to that. There might be more, but I'll speak to two of the key elements that I've seen kind of be a success factor for these types of transformation. The one very, very important factor is awareness. And this awareness comes at many levels, right? So the first part of digital business transformation, which I describe quite a bit in detail in the book as well. The first step is really situational analysis. And this is a fancy way of saying build awareness for yourself. And this is really just looking at your current market environment, looking at the trends that are hitting your business, what's going to change, what kind of disruptions are coming in. And there's a step by step process that's described, like trend scans and things like that. That is looking at your business environment awareness. What is going to happen to my business, and trying to make an intelligent assessment around what needs to change. The same thing happens for us as well. We need to have awareness around, if you're in a leadership position, what's your leadership style? What is the leadership style that's needed for the future? Let's say you are in an organization that's leading a group of people that are very, very sophisticated in technology. How do you lead people in this tech space? How do you drive change with these very sophisticated, intelligent group of people, for example? It's a different way of leading as well when you have a multifunctional team, right? You have to be very aware of um, your style of leadership and the type of person that you are and what kind of communication fits that style and so on. If you're an employee, it's an awareness around, what do you want to see in the long term within your organization? Does this organization's values and direction align with your own personal values? This is becoming increasingly important for the next generation of people. So I'm looking at the millennials and the Gen Zs and the alphas. My daughter is an alpha, for example. I can never imagine her working in a traditional organization. She won't even step into a bank. A completely different mindset. She's thinking digital wallets, and she's a completely different environment. She's growing up in the world of the metaverse, right?
Yeah.
And so she's not at all thinking about walking into a bank and setting up an account and things like that. So this next generation of people are going to be demanding a completely different way of doing things. And they're looking for higher purpose. They're looking for meaningful work. They're looking for connections not just socially, but also with the work that they do and the outcomes and the results that they see from that. And so a lot of this comes with awareness, having an understanding for where you are and what you want to get out of the environment. The second piece was really looking at the type of business that you're in and what is the kind of industry that you're in as well. I think there's going to be a significant amount of transformation that's happening across various industries. We're seeing industry boundaries crossing and changing and shifting. For example, tech companies entering into other industries and so on. So we're seeing quite a lot of the traditional rules and assumptions of business getting destroyed and blurred, basically, right? It's almost non-existent today. The way we engage with customers, the way we drive product development and how we launch products in the market, how we access the different regions or enter into different markets and market expansion, for example. And even looking at the way we manage people, the way we manage operations in a business, all of these elements have changed. And at the core of this is um, technology enabling these changes. And I think these are things that have to be part of what we are aware of as well.
Mm. Yeah, my son is also he's a 13-year-old right now, so he's just kind of on the edge of Gen Z Alpha, I think. But but he is in the metaverse. We he just showed me a video last night about kind of that microchip war,
Hmm.
the power for control over microchips across the world.
Hmm.
Um, like we're talking about all kinds of things that have to do with the digital world and how it impacts the real world, if you will. Um, do you when you think of these people like our kids and the world that they're entering into, that they will enter into, and the careers that they might have, um, what do you hope for them? What do you want for them? What do you suggest that your daughter do and study and think about? Because there's I guess one of the things that I think about is ethics, and how do we bring ethics into this new digital age further, and things like that. So, what are some of your thoughts on this?
I mean, my hope for the next generation of people, including my daughter, is um, that they can stay very close to their values. To be able to understand what your values are as a human and to stay close to that. And what we're seeing is, if I think back, I'm 45 now, and if I think back to when I was a kid, what I was told growing up was, you have to get a job and you have to find stability, you have to find security. This was the most important value that people prioritize, right? Security, stability, good job, and so on. What we want to tell our kids, hopefully, this is what we're saying to our kids at the moment, is find something that makes you happy, that aligns with your inner values. And this next generation of people are really doing that. If I think about my daughter and her friends and how they are concerned about climate change. This was not at all in my radar as a kid, right? This was not something that we talked about as teenagers. And so I'm optimistic when I think about the next generation of people coming in. And they have now exponential technology, emerging technologies that can create exponential change for good. And this is exciting because they're growing up in a generation where technology is just part of daily life. It's not something new for them. They can't imagine us growing up. In the 80s, we didn't have internet and we didn't have all of these types of technologies. And what we have today are amazing breakthrough creations that can enable us to do so much good in the world at such a rapid pace. We don't have to wait a generation for us to be able to make these changes. So I'm very optimistic about that. On the flip side of that, and you mentioned this earlier, is kind of the regulatory environment. On the flip side of that, we have also these tech. It's a tool. It could be used for good or bad, depending on the people using them. And that's where the values come in. With the right values and the right basis foundation, as humans wanting to do good, you can do a lot of good with the tech. On the other hand, without the right values, you can also do a lot of bad with it. And I think this is the differentiating factor. What's going to happen in the future will depend on how people relate to their values.
Mm. When it comes to companies trying to engage this age group, and when they know that they need to make change, um, I've heard you talk about younger advisory boards.
Mhm.
Do you mind sharing that with our audience?
Absolutely. I think this is something that's shifting a little bit more as well. We're seeing more companies set up shadow advisory boards, young advisory boards, so bringing in the next generation of people, even some as young as high school or college, university students, to support them in opening up their mindset and thinking in a different way, which I find very encouraging. I think bringing in the next generation of people, it's beneficial both ways. So allowing the younger generation to learn quickly in these settings. If you think about 10 years ago, bringing in someone who is a 21-year-old or a 20-year-old into a board environment would be not even considered, would be outrageous. And today we're seeing many companies doing this because they want to learn from the next generation. They want to be closer to the market and to the new generation of consumers.
Mm.
But on the other hand, these younger people get then a taste of what it's like in these environments. How do these compliance and governance structures work? The role of board members and so on. So I find it quite exciting. Where it could get a little bit dangerous is when there's not enough of a structure or framework set up around that. We need to be able to elicit the right value and insights from these types of relationships and not just take them at face value and not just say, just because someone's 20 years old, they can drive the kind of market direction of an organization based on what they know. So there's a certain need. I'm a true believer in kind of paying your dues and earning your experience and gaining enough experience as well. So
Mm.
these are things that need to happen within these structures.
Mm.
I'm also a big supporter of diversity in tech, diversity in boards, diversity in leadership. We are still quite far behind in these areas, and I think there's a long way to go. And for me, I have to clarify as well, Andrea, diversity isn't just about gender diversity. It is about bringing in diversity of thought. And diversity of thought comes in the form of different cultural backgrounds, different educational backgrounds, age groups, sexual orientation, different kinds of preferences. So I think these are very, very important aspects to bring in.
I agree, and yet I also wanna ask the question, why? Why do you think that they're so important?
Um, we've seen so many examples of things that have gone wrong because you don't have diversity of thought in the room. Enough people questioning decisions. When you have a singular type of group of people in a room looking at a certain problem or a topic, and not looking at it from a broad perspective, but looking at it from a very narrow lens. Let's take the example of building transformative tech. If we're building an AI system that's going to be utilized by a wider group of people, if you're building kind of a blockchain solution or even a metaverse environment, you need to have the people from these diverse sets of communities being part of um, that group that's building and designing these structures. Otherwise, I mean, it's natural human bias, right? Everybody has bias, and our biases are built in us based on our experiences as we grow, and our life experiences. As for me as a woman of color, I have a certain experience. I may not be able to understand or relate to someone from the Middle East, for example, right? Who or someone from the US or Canada who has grown up with a certain experience. So if I'm building something that's meant to be used by the masses, I need to bring in people from these backgrounds so I can understand their experiences and how they might utilize this technology or how something might impact them. I can give you a very simple example. Um, recently I was observing, or I was part of a community of people who were developing a pitch for a company, a lingerie company, and the pitch team consisted of 12 men, which I found quite fascinating. It was actually quite hilarious because we were all part of this group, and I was not part of the pitch team, but I was observing the communication and how they were developing the pitch content. And they were trying really, really hard to understand why this particular lingerie company was appealing to preteen women and not women in their mid 40s. And so there was market research being shared, and survey content and website information and so on. And I was like, guys, I can answer these questions for you. Straightforward, I can answer these questions for you because I'm the target group that they want to reach. And it hadn't occurred to them, right? Because you come in with a certain bias and you think, oh, yeah, okay, I can reach out and look at market research and get the information I need. But it doesn't translate the individual person's experience and the customer experience, the insights that you get, the reasonings that you can bring as a person from this diverse background. So I find this, it's very fascinating for me to have some of these experiences and to have these observations. I find that it was quite hilarious actually to watch those conversations.
I can only imagine. So, um, a couple things around AI and ethics and that sort of thing. A few years ago, I was at a conference and saw for the first time, this was maybe 2017 or 18. And the first time I really saw AI and customer service, the future of that, where we were looking at real looking faces and voices that were totally fake, but they were responding to real time questions. And as someone who really cares about the human side of digital transformation, what are your thoughts on addressing the ethics of AI and how we continue to provide choice to people when AI seems to be just assuming that we've already made these decisions? Like it's presenting what they think that we want with algorithms and such.
I think this is again comes back to what we just talked about in terms of diversity. If let's take Chat GPT, for example. If I remember correctly, they use 175 billion parameters for the development of Chat GPT. So data points that are from all of these different elements and databases. And what's happening now is the system is learning, which is why they've opened it up. There's a lot of hype. The more people that use it, the more it learns.
Hmm.
So I find that quite exciting because it's given the opportunity to the masses to kind of train the data, and it's really building up its experience and knowledge. But in terms of ethics, I think there's still a lot that needs to be done um, to ensure that um, the choices that we need to be making with these systems are not taken away from us.
Yeah.
There's not enough regulation in this space. There aren't enough regulators who understand the space enough. Might be a bit controversial to say this, but I think anyone who is in the space of regulating tech needs to go into an education. There has to be some kind of certification done
Mm,
for regulators to qualify themselves, to ask the right questions,
mm,
to put the right frameworks in place. And I think this is very important, not just to ensure that things don't go sideways, but also to ensure that we don't stifle innovation. Innovation is an extremely important process. We need to make sure innovation continues, that we're not over regulating. But on the other hand, we need to make sure that the tech that's being developed, AI systems, are actually being used in the right way, and they are there are good checks and controls put in place. Um, And this goes for, I think, the general population as well. We're heading into a space where it's going to be increasingly challenging to identify what's real and what's not with AI.
mhm.
Where's the truth? Who is the real person? What is the information that's being shared? And if we take a simpler example, the previous generation where we saw, or the previous development cycle of technology where we saw this happen was with social media, right? Social media came out, it redefined the way, so these channels redefined the way we communicated and interacted with one another. It took the power of communication away from institutions and organizations back into the individual user. Now, individual users, what have they done with this power? There's been great good that's done with it, but there's also been a lot of harm that social media has created.
Yeah.
Now, if you exponentiate this with AI systems, digital avatars, and virtual humans, and these types of technologies, where it's not just about the content communication that's going to be misleading or that could shift mindsets. I mean, this was one of the greatest um, impacts of social media. It's an interaction channel that has the ability to shift mindsets and shift perspectives. Now, if you take that and exponentiate that with technology that looks like us, it talks like us,
Mhm.
and interacts like another human being, and oftentimes you won't even be able to tell the difference whether it's a real person or not, or you might even forget that it's not a real person. What environment are we heading into? Do we have enough sophistication as users to make these assessments and to decide ethically this is the right thing to do or not the right thing to do? So these are some of the things that I would be concerned about. It's not so straightforward to regulate something like this, though.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's going to be an interesting challenge for humanity as we move on. I'm getting a
I'm
bit serious now.
I'm so curious about this because I think that there's a lot of people asking questions. I'm wondering who's out there, and maybe but who's out there actually making progress toward answering some of these questions and figuring out what we need to do about regulation and how we're going to do that. Who's out there doing that?
There are definitely pockets of organizations that are looking into this. And I think, for example, in Switzerland, we do have regulators, a small group of, it's kind of a task force that's working closely with the regulators as well as the tech companies. They haven't progressed very far, though. I mean, even in the World Economic Forum, there are some really, really interesting debates and sessions going on where they're asking the right questions. The problem is the answers are not there yet, and the tech is developing at such a rapid rate. We're still asking the questions, and the tech's out there already.
Mhm.
So I think this is the kind of disconnect that we're seeing. What I would think would be interesting is to bring some of these, and you do see some very, very exciting developments happening within the AI community, where people are being very cognizant. These very intelligent research scientists are being very cognizant about the potential danger of these technologies. But then you also have companies that are purely looking at commercial value. So I recently saw a report of a company that has produced a drone that could be utilized as I can't remember the term. It's could be utilized by the military to attack individuals within a war space or a war zone. And this could be transformative for any country that owns such technology. It could be very, very easy to kind of shift the balance of power in any kind of war zone. And I saw that, and alarm bells went off in my head, thinking, okay, who's obviously this? Every government will want to own this tech.
Yeah.
Who's sitting above governments to regulate this? No one at the moment. So this is something I would find. And what would be very interesting would be not just organizations, but individuals stepping forward with the right set of values and beliefs, who would then be able to ask the right questions and bring in the right answers as well.
Mm.
And I think this is where the human side comes in. It really comes down to values.
Mm. So interesting. Thank you for sharing that. All right. Some of the folks that listen to this podcast or been on this podcast are from like mid-market startups, that sort of thing. Um, what advice do you have for tech startups that, okay, they've received funding, they're feeling all this pressure to perform with these new target numbers, and how do you recommend that they address the culture part, the human side, in the midst of such pressure?
Absolutely. I think this is very exciting to answer because I have been a startup mentor for quite a number of years within the blockchain space as well as fintech space. One of the things that I found very exciting about being part of this, the startup world is the innovation and the focus on developing solutions. There's so much focus on developing the tech solution,
Mhm.
but It's great to have those kind of focused goals. But what I think, and this is part of what I've described in the book as well, chapter 3, if anyone's interested,
That's right.
building the right startup culture, which is really looking at beyond the kind of solution that you're putting out in the market. What kind of organization do you want to build as you move into kind of professionalizing your business and your organization as it hits the next level of maturity and growth? That question should be asked at the very beginning. So most of the startups that I have worked with or advised, there was the common thread of, for them, culture was all about bringing in a HR person and hiring the skill sets you need to grow the company. And it goes beyond that. It goes into what is the founder's values, right? What are the founder's values? What are these basic elements that have brought people together to build a solution? What's the purpose of your startup? And how do you find the right set of people as you grow your organization? Right people who fit those types of values as well, who are in alignment with that purpose and value. So these are questions that sometimes, if you are in a startup environment that's um, working long hours to develop your solution and get it out in the market and start commercializing your business, these are not questions that take priority oftentimes. And then you hit a certain level of success and growth, and suddenly you turn around and realize we haven't built the right kind of culture to keep our company sustainable. And we've seen numerous examples of these in the market. And so I think the questions have to be asked at the very beginning. What is the company, not just what is the solution I want to put out in the market, but what kind of company do I want to build as a founder? And how do I go about doing that at the very beginning and kind of create a journey across the board? Um, and here it's really having a strong understanding of the purpose of your organization and the core values that you want to embody in the company. So I do address a couple of examples in the book, comparisons between, for example, Airbnb and Uber. Uh, One of the culture was right, the other was wrong, and we saw how that played out as well. And then with larger organizations, I also addressed, for example, Adobe, in terms of being such a massive organization with such a strong name in the market, how they addressed the COVID environment and what was the outcome of that. So I think these are things that any organization should start addressing at the very beginning. Apart from the culture element, though, I do want to give a piece of advice for startups as well. Go beyond looking at the solution you're putting out in the market and look at your business model, look at your customer value proposition, look at the operations and processes you want to set up in the business, the types of people you want to bring in and the team structures. These are all very, very important questions to ask, which oftentimes I find startups don't put too much focus on those elements as they do on the product and the commercialization of it.
Hmm. Really good. How should companies, mid-market in particular, be thinking about blockchain technology? You've mentioned this. And how it could impact their business, I guess, in the next 5 to 10 years. How should they be thinking about it?
Um, Blockchain is one of my passions. I got into the space fairly early on with crypto, and then I realized, okay, the real gem is the blockchain technology behind it. And it could be extremely transformative. But what we're seeing is over the COVID period in particular, there was a little bit of a slowdown in terms of development and hype around blockchain. The companies that survived the COVID period have been the ones that had really strong value propositions and solutions for the market. My particular interest has been around supply chain. I've implemented blockchain for agriculture, for palm oil in Malaysia as well. And so these are, I think blockchain could bring a significant transformation in the business space, not only in terms of optimizing operations, providing an extremely rapid and efficient services, payment structures, accessibility across the market, easy cross region or cross market infrastructures. So I think that there's a lot of benefit that could come out of it, but it's still in the stage of further development. So if I were a company at the moment looking into this technology, I think being able to understand what that impact could be, it'll happen fairly quickly in the next 3 to 5 years, where you'll see some transformations really occur. Having a good understanding for what these technologies could do in your business or how it could disrupt your business and your business operations, or what kind of benefits you could find from it. Um, the element that I think is probably going to be far more disruptive than just blockchain, though, is the combination of technologies. For example, blockchain plus AI based systems, right?
Hmm.
One of the key values or key benefits of blockchain technology is creating this provenance of data, for example, and transparency, but still that certain level of security. One of the disadvantages of AI systems is the lack of transparency in terms of data and how data is utilized. And so combining these technologies, you could create a very, very powerful system that creates a certain transparency and data accuracy and provenance of data. But the speed of AI systems that can um, basically utilize the data, manipulate the data, or even make sense of the data in such a high speed. So the combination of these technologies, and then if you add on to that AI systems, sorry, if you add on to that virtual and augmented reality system, sensor based technology, you can have very powerful transformative solutions coming out in the market. So these are some of the things I'm very excited to see come out in the future.
Hmm. Wow. So many things to think about and keep our minds aware of and everything. I'm just really excited about the kind of voice that you have in this space. I really am. I genuinely feel like positive about people like you being out there, being able to help guide and um, ask the right questions, but then hopefully also start to provide some of these answers as well. Kamalish, where can people find your book and find you?
I am pretty much on every social, but I'm really active on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn and Twitter, so people can find me there, and I'm super happy to connect with people, continue the conversation. So I'm very open, and I connect with people very openly. So this is definitely a possibility. You can find me as well on kamaleshlardi.com, which is the website where you can find access to the book. And my book is available on pretty much Amazon and pretty much every other online book channel you can find. So if you want to look for it on Amazon or even on wiley.com, and it's also on my website. So there are some links to purchase the book.
Mm.
And I would really appreciate it if, if you like the book, write a Amazon review. That always helps.
Yes, yes. I'll be sure to do that. Okay. So this is the Voice of Influence podcast. We care about leadership, organizational development, healthy influence. What last piece of advice would you want to give to somebody who wants to have a voice of influence?
Um, oh, that's an interesting question. I think I can relate back to what's worked for me. Authenticity and being bold and being passionate. And I think here, really being authentic about who you are and what you represent as an individual, as a person, being bold about stepping forward, having a voice. We need people who are going to be bold and having a strong voice in the market, having a kind of good understanding for the changes that are happening in the business environment, the tech environment, and really being bold about voicing out concerns as well as new ideas, and really being passionate. I think I love the field that I'm in. I absolutely enjoy it. I find it exciting, and I'm extremely optimistic about the future and how people will be using these technologies. And so this is something that drives me. And so these would be the advice:
Hmm.
authenticity, boldness, and passion.
Mm. Well, thank you. Thank you, Kamalish, for being a voice of influence for our listeners today.
Thank you so much for having me, Andrea. It's been a pleasure.